Вы думаете, уже все здесь? Публика собралась?
Мы здесь.
Вы здесь, это замечательно.
Главное здесь.
Да.
Все остальные опоздали.
Waiting another 5 minutes or what?
Just to wait until 15:15.
Until 15. Very good.
We still
Yeah.
have 5 people who got the tickets.
Who got the tickets? Yeah. Good.
I think we should ask audience actually. Are they prepared to wait another 5 minutes?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Maybe you ask about the language
Yes.
at this point.
What language would you like? Because we're going to have a panel discussion. Would you like Russian? Would you like English? Does anybody have a strong preference? Anybody doesn't understand?
Either.
Пришли. У нас сегодня последний вечер благотворительного аукциона «Tamizdat», который собирает деньги на поддержку студентов и ученых, которые оказались в вынужденной эмиграции. И в прошлом году они смогли поддержать 20 студентов по итогу такого же мероприятия. И сейчас мы надеемся, что все деньги от билетов и все деньги от ставок на аукционе идут на хорошее дело. Аукцион открылся 28 апреля и заканчивается сегодня. По Лондону он закончится в 2 часа ночи, потому что в Нью-Йорке вместится. Поэтому ставку можно делать до 2 часов ночи по нашей таймзоне. Поскольку часовые пояса разные, Нью-Йорк не осмелился назначать свое мероприятие на утро, но у нас мероприятие будет синхронно в Нью-Йорке, в Лондоне, в Берлине, в Тбилиси, в Вильнюсе, в Риге, в Таллине. Большая международная группа. Спасибо вам огромное, что участвуете в ее части. Здесь есть книги наших сегодняшних спикеров с описанием QR-кода, вы можете попасть на страничку аукциона, делать ставки. Я передаю слово нашему сегодняшнему прекрасному выступателю. Спасибо вам всем большое, что вы согласились участвовать, что пришли к нам сегодня. Добро пожаловать.
Спасибо.
Спасибо вам.
Спасибо, что понимаете. Да, и спасибо, что пришли.
Такой прекрасный солнечный день. И еще в воскресенье. Я не меня зовут Josephine von Zitzewitz. Я буду менять языки. I'll speak English. My English is probably a bit better. I'm very pleased to be the chair here. And what we will do is we all have brought our books, and we will all talk a little bit about the books that we have brought and what they're doing at this charity auction, and to make it a bit more lively, we'll ask each other questions. I'll direct questions at our authors, and I'm incredibly pleased to introduce our first author, Robert Chandler, whom you probably know, who is one of the most distinguished translators of Russian literature into English today. And one of the things that I marvel at is his translations of Platonov into English. I used to have to teach Platonov to undergraduates, and some of them were not Russian students, students of Russian language, and I was asked at Bristol University to teach it in English, and I was like, Platonov in English? And then Robert's translation came out, and it helped me very much. But what is on sale today with the auction is a collection that Robert has edited, which is the Penguin collection of modern Russian poetry, which Robert has in his hands. And don't worry, he's not selling that and also his short life of Pushkin and a book translation by Tefi, other works. And so these are the 3 books that Robert has brought, and I think he wants to read to us from the translation, from the poetry translations, and he wants to read something by Shalamov. And he has a real advantage over everybody else because, no, actually that's not true, Zinovy is also a fiction author, because he can just read from the book. All of us who've written academic books, or you are, it's only me who's boring. We can't really read from it. So Robert, over to you. I shut up.
So, given the theme of Tamizdat, and very, very long time ago, some of the very first translations I published were of stories by Varlam Shalamov in the magazine Index on Censorship. And it was in London that the first Russian, more or less complete collection of his Gulag stories, Kalamar Tales, was published. Shalamov's stories have always rather eclipsed his poems. He himself thought of himself, certainly, I think he probably considered his poetry more important, but I think his poetry is very underestimated. I'm going to read 2 poems. One of the remarkable things about Shalamov is that he is often the themes, like sort of the unreality of the material world, they're very much sort of as if from the silver age of Russian poetry long before, but they're given a sort of a reality by being grounded in his actual experience of Kalymar. So he was in Kalymar for about 20 years. So you'll see what I mean. Memory has veiled much evil. Her long lies leave nothing to believe. There may be no cities or green gardens, only fields of ice and salty oceans. The world may be pure snow, a starry road, just northern forest in mind of God. So I'm sure you can see that after 20 years of Kalymar, you could easily start to believe and doubt if Moscow and Petersburg actually exist. Another tiny poem, which I want to read in both languages. It's very mysterious. We don't really know. I mean, if anyone has any understanding, please let me know one way or another afterwards. But I'm not sure what the blue envelope is, and I'm not sure the addressee of this letter that he carries with him. I think it could be God, or it could possibly be his audience, his readers. So how many of you are native Russian speakers? Most of you. Okay. I shall try to read it first of all in Russian, which is a bit cheeky of me, but I can never get people to read it as slowly as I think it should be read. Так вот и хожу на вершок от смерти. Жизнь свою ношу в синеньком конверте. То письмо давно с осени готово. В нем всего одно маленькое слово. Может, потому и не умираю, что тому письму адреса не знаю. I think it's a quite amazing poem. It has an ability that I think only Aninsky had before him, of in a very short poem, allowing himself to use so many short, dull words like a whole line, mujit patamu. I mean, you know, how can you make a tiny lyric with such ordinary words as that? So in English. And so I keep going. Death remains close. I carry my life in a blue envelope. The letter's been ready ever since autumn. Just one little word, it couldn't be shorter. But I still don't know where I should end it. But I still don't know where I should send it. If I had the address, my life might have ended. I think that's a very great poem indeed. I think that these two anthologies are remarkable, and I take every opportunity to mention them, even if it's not strictly within the parameters of this evening. And they're both bilingual, and they're both poems by Russophone poets living in any number of different countries. I do encourage you to buy them. I'm glad to announce publicly for the first time that I have actually just yesterday persuaded Andy Croft, the wonderful publisher of Smokestack Books, to reprint another at least 60 copies. I was dismayed the other day to find it was out of print, but I managed to bully him into more. So this is, I think, one of the most remarkable poems in the first of these anthologies. This one is extremely cheap, it's less than £10, which is remarkable for a bilingual anthology, and the other one is more expensive. So this is a very, very unusual poem indeed, with a very, very profound psychological understanding. Galina Itzkovich, I shall just read in English. War is a train. Every morning, starting with Thursday, I'd tell my mom that war has broken out. Each time she'd be surprised. War belonged back in her childhood. There was no such thing as war for adults. This wasn't Russian propaganda, it was merely dementia, a blessed forgetting of anything too big and too frightening. So this poem obviously was written a couple of years ago, or getting on for 3 years ago. It sank in by Sunday. She began to search for her own mother, to cry with terror, to plead and fumble about in a blind panic. Wasn't Mama lying beside her just now, on that dusty, frozen-through bolt of ratteen fabric they took along, breathing on her, trying to warm her, and then she disappeared? Papa's at the front and their own train pulled away long ago. I remember now, war is a train, my mom wails. Memory fails, but eidetic fear lives on. Mama, has everyone forgotten me? Could this cold thing be Mama? Where am I? Are the fascists above? Are they below? Maybe I've inhaled them and now they're inside of me. After a sedative, she curls up into a grey-haired embryo and lies still for a long, long time, until the fascists forget about her, until she forgets about her mama's death, until she becomes less noticeable than a grain, a seed, a mote on a bedsheet. So that's my so-called background. That's the fear that wells up within me. Please don't grow up, Mum. Don't continue this saga into Monday. Don't live in fear of Tuesday. Stop and stay in that 1941 of yours, so that I'll never have to be born to encounter your own terror, that persistent mortal dread on the faces of the kids just brought out of Bucha.
Whose translation is that?
I was about to say that it was translated by Masha Blostein, who did a lot of translations for both these anthologies, and she's a remarkable translator, and she was really a kind of co-editor or assistant editor of this book. So thank you all.
Perhaps we should continue with poetry.
I think we'll have time for Q&A afterwards. So afterwards, you're most welcome to ask any of the readers questions. So if you have questions, keep them in mind. If you can't, if you know you won't be able to remember them, write them down or take a voice note. We've got paper as well. So because I can never remember what I want to ask people. But I love poetry, and I'd like to invite our next poet perhaps to tell us about her book, Hanna Komar, who is a Belarusian author, and who has brought us a book of documentary poems. And Hanna left Belarus in 2020 after the protests, and so could you tell us how these poems came about, and perhaps also about the layout of the book? I've seen it's bilingual, so tell us more about it, and maybe read something.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Josie. Yeah, I'm Hanna Komar. I left Belarus in 2021. I don't know how much of you know what was happening. So in 2020 we had a so-called election, which we hoped would be the election, but it ended up as usual, except that the scale of the protests after the election, which were falsified, were much bigger than, like, the biggest in the contemporary history of the Republic of Belarus since 1990s. And it was clear, like months after months, we were taken to the streets and in this mass peaceful marches, and there were different protests in different forms. And it became clear at some point that we were not winning. And people started leaving. People have been leaving since the summer of 2020 for different reasons. Some because they needed to go to rehabilitation because they were beaten and tortured in prisons. But others could see that was not going where we thought it was, so they were leaving. Others were fleeing persecution. So there were different stories. I was still in Belarus. I was in Belarus till September 21. And my friends had been leaving. And at some point, there was this division between those who left and those who stayed. And those who stayed, they felt abandoned. And they were looking at the Facebook or Instagram photos of those who left and thinking, oh, are you just enjoying your life? You abandoned us here and you are having fun, you're enjoying your life, good food, you don't care about Belarus. And I knew that was not true, because for everybody who I knew who left, it was quite a dramatic and traumatic and difficult experience. And I'm a poet and writer, and I thought I want to write about it. And my initial idea was to ask around some people, ask them questions, so they write down the answers. And I wanted to write one poem from what they wrote. But then as people were sharing stories, I realized one poem was not enough. Like, each story was a separate poem. And I didn't know when I started doing it, I was doing documentary poetry. Because what I did literally with the first interview, I remember, I singled out in this yellow the words and phrases and then sentences that felt like the key ones for me. And then I collaged, like you do with a documentary film, basically. I collaged and montaged, and I did 20 of those in the end. And the cover is, you may, I don't know if you recognize that maybe Gensel and Gretel, you know, breadcrumbs, hoping that you can follow them back home, and the names of all those 20 people who share their stories, because I believe it's key there. It's their stories. I kind of was a tool, you know, for them to get read and to get told. And it's bilingual. It's in Belarusian and Russian, because in Belarus we speak 2 languages and we have 2 state languages, and it didn't feel right to change. I myself write in Belarusian, but I wouldn't change the way people told me the stories. I think it's not fair, because it's a document, and that's just how the situation is. Yeah, they have a very interesting layout, because, you know, like, there are a lot of space, pauses, because, you know, when people tell stories about something really important, it's not straightforward. It's not just the simple punctuation. It's messy. It's it's messy, basically. And I tried showing, and in the silence, a lot is spoken as well. So there is a lot of the silence and the things that are not spoken. So I will actually read a few poems. I'll read one in Belarusian and at least one in Russian, and we see if we want to hear more. Most of the people who share their stories are either my friends or, actually they're my friends. And I'll read one of my favorite ones. She's my best friend. I was observing her leaving, and Alina. Довго, 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 довго розбилося серце матулі. Довго, 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 довго плакала не плачи. Темное зимовое небо, неутульные ліхтари, ночь, снег, темра и лес. Ці не задорого гэта. Плакали, плакали, плакали з сяброўкай, з маімі былымі кветкамі, у маім былым пакоі, у маім былым горадзе. Плакала маё былое жыццё. Першыя 10 дзён рубіла дровы. Жах, тугу, боль. Обдымала пса. Жах, тугу, боль. Збірала ў лесе. Жах, тугу, боль. Гатавала ежу. Жах, тугу, боль. Люблю выратоўваць са сметніка самоту. Жах, тугу, боль. Няма сілаў. Ёсць мары вярнуцца. I have this in the English translation if someone would like to know what exactly I've just read, or you are fine?
Oh, I would like to.
Yeah, yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, sure. It just always makes me emotional. And just relive it, you know, again and again and again. Alina. For a long, 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 long time, my mother's heart broke. For a long, 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 long time, the murky winter sky disturbed streetlights. Night and snow cried on my shoulder. Is freedom too high a price? We cried, cried and cried with my friends, with the flowers that used to be mine, in the room that used to be mine, in the city that used to be mine, over the life that used to be mine. For the first 10 days, I would gather dread, grief, pain, wood. I would hug dread, grief, and pain. A dog. I would cook dread, grief, and pain that I picked up in the forest. Saving plants, dread, grief, and pain from trash is something I know well. It's all I have, and the dream to return home. When I was writing these poems, I didn't know that I would become one of these people who left home and is dreaming to return, but can't yet. And another poem is called Yegor. Let me find it. I found it it was told by a male friend, and it's extremely touching. It's like, yeah, very, very intimate. He wasn't holding back his emotions, and I think I respect and admire that. Let me just find it. Oh yeah. Вообще, то ли это уже старость, то ли инстинктивное желание схватиться за первый попавшийся обломок после пережитого кораблекрушения. На новом месте я моментально влюбляюсь, без разумных на то оснований, в места и вещи. Очень хочется обзавестись какой-то рутиной, кафешкой, в которую приходишь, садишься за столик, официант спрашивает, вам как обычно? И ты киваешь. Хотя бы домом, из которого не надо выезжать на следующей неделе. Хотя бы домом. Мои друзья, наши последние встречи были по-мужскому эмоциональны. Все вроде как обычно, выдают мелочи. Друг хочет запомнить тебя таким, как сегодня. С одним встретили закат, обсудили рецепт супа. С другим до глубокой ночи говорили, смеялись, молчали. Впервые мы так открылись друг другу. Запомнить, 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 запомнить. Обычно в жизни мне помогает ощущение, что все не в последний раз. И сюда приеду, и туда вернусь, а вот то место вообще куплю и буду там жить. А тут я затасковал. Это двор, это дерево, этого человека я могу больше никогда не увидеть. Привязалась обида, такая злость даже на тех, чья хата все еще с краю, кто не добастовал, не довыходил, пока лучшие люди страны рисковали жизнью, свободой. А не уехать ли, не уехать ли, не уехать, ехать? Не позволить феодалу считать меня собственностью, стричь налоги, лишь бы вокруг все понятно, привычно. Скоро мы уже собирались. Сплю хорошо, с этим проблем не было. Здесь ничего не мешает погрузиться в мысли на целую ночь. Лечь в 8 утра, проспать всю жару, и за час до заката звонит будильник. Закат дает ощущение, будто не совсем уж бессмысленно прожить день. It's very emotional, and I don't want to torture you, because I guess some of you probably also left home and would like to come back, but can't. So I don't know, would you like me to read one more poem? Yeah? Okay. Вас пощадите, что такое понятно.
После шаларму.
Да. Так, ну это такое мягкое. Кто-то, не все уезжали так грустно, кто-то хотел. Но оно на белорусском, поэтому до конца не сказал. хорошо. Вот человек преследовался за журналистику и принадлежность к группу движению анархистов. Вот. Саян. После суток и угроз они приходили, они искали. Я работал журналистом-оператором независимых СМИ, а в свободное время помогал нуждающимся, бездомным людям. Распространял листовки, обучающие к горизонтальным отношениям, с призывами к проявлению солидарности. Слишком опасная смесь для властей. Пора. Правильно ли я поступаю, уезжая, оставляя здесь своих? Моя поездка может закончиться на белорусской границе. Я не хотел, чтобы жена ехала, не хотел, чтобы она мучилась. Я поеду с тобой, я хочу быть рядом. Дом на хуторе, далеко от цивилизации. Только лес и поля. Все такое теплое, как через советский гелец. Где я сейчас? Почему ехал? Правильно ли я сделал? Мой день начинался с рубки дров. Выплеснуть злость на диктатора, его прихвостни, карательные органы, на людей, которые провалили революцию. На себя, что я здесь. Разум был в Беларуси. Каждое утро, в течение дня, с чем ложился спать. Новости из дома. Моя жена прошла этот путь со мной, плечом к плечу, разговаривала, утешала. Она дает мне силы не опускать руки. Меня подали в розыск по 5 уголовным статьям. Сейчас бы сидел в тюрьме. Если пришли, значит, мой вклад сыграл роль. Удалил все новости с Беларуси, перестал быть таким нервным. Ты сделал все правильно. Закрывая глаза, я чувствую легкость. Безграничный полет моих мыслей. Такой мой хэппи-энд.
Thank you very much, Hanna, and for the amazingly well-crafted narrative arc of your contribution as well. I'm a bit, yeah, this is perhaps a little bit of a...
My apologies, Josie, and everyone, that I have to leave early.
You know that. Yeah. Robert, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I feel this is maybe, yeah. So this is, I think I'll use my chair's privilege and give the word to myself. This is an academic book called The Culture of Samizdat, Literature and Underground Networks in the late Soviet Union. And it's got work in some of the interviews I took and some of the things I collected really. I collected during the early 2010s, some interviews I took in 2015, and it was finished and sent to the publisher in 2019, came out in 2021. And it's not a book about networks, it's a book about networks, it's not a book about Samizdat texts. So it's about people who read and people who typed and people who set up Samizdat libraries and edited journals. So there's a lot of empirical stuff in it. And when I thought, how am I going to introduce this to an audience today, I thought, actually, you've just given me an amazing idea. I should do the same thing. I should write another such book and take contemporary networks. Because I think it is now possible, and maybe this bookshop is actually a good example, and all these books who are published with an 18 plus, I mean, this is actually, and also this is Новая литературное обозрение, Zinovy's books, and this is available in Russian, but a lot of the best books written in Russian today, it's much easier to get them in Tel Aviv or Vilnius or Berlin, because they are not published in Russia or in Belarus. and people actually can go to prison for them again. Not, of course, not for writing books, but because perhaps for defaming the Russian army, or as we saw 2 days ago, for propaganda of LGBT in books that were published a while ago. So it's almost uncanny that the situation has returned, and at the same time, of course, I don't want to draw any cheap parallels. You know, the brain is a pattern-making mechanism, but you know, people compare Putin to Hitler, and you know, Samizdat to contemporary situation. I'm not sure that's always very helpful. And of course, the situation today is different because there is the internet. And on the one hand, the internet allows almost complete censorship because people can see your every social media post and like, and they don't even need to look themselves. They don't have to have a KGB agent outside your house. They just run some kind of algorithm. And on the other hand, the internet makes it possible for people to keep a connection, and the connections, they are there, and it's impossible to sever them completely. So people have stayed in touch, and texts come back and forth, and they are really ingenious ways of making sure that texts cross the border. If you buy Medusa has all these interesting ways of sending free ebooks if you come from Russia, and in Russia the books are free, and maybe if I wanted to write about the equivalent of Samizdat typists, I would have to interview IT people, and people set up VPNs and say, how is it that I can buy this from Russia but it won't be seen that I bought it, and how can I have it on my computer without you know, it becoming compromat? So in a sense, the internet is also very hopeful in that sense. And perhaps the last thing I want to say is the culture. The title of this is not an accident. The culture of Tamizdat. It was a reading culture, and where people recognized each other by and I think today that's also in a way the case. There are people who read things that may get them into trouble or may have got others into trouble, and maybe then there are people who wouldn't because they're afraid, or people who wouldn't because they are ideologically in a different place. So reading culture as something that brings people together, and reading as something that leads to groups forming, and I mean, you can see us here maybe as one such group, and perhaps hopefully bidding, supporting this event in support of students, of scholars in need. And I'm just thinking of various initiatives again during the times when in the late Soviet Union, when people were collecting money and trying to support others who had become had fallen victim to political persecution. Actually, I'm just looking here that one of the people recommending this book is Ilya Kukulin, a good friend of mine, who was then professor at the Higher School of Economics at the Wishka in Moscow, and then of course had to leave. He is now in Stanford as a scholar in need, and in a very precarious position, because all these positions, great as they are fixed term, so people will need ongoing support. And I think I'll stop there and change my hat, invisible hat, and I return to being chair, and I'm very pleased to finally meet Zinovy. I think I've seen you, but I've never had the chance to speak to you. Zinovy is our most prolific author, Zinovy Zinik, who was born in Moscow but has been in the UK for a very long time. I think you can bid for 4 of his books in this auction, and they've all been signed by him. So he told me he would prefer to speak about this, one of his last books, which is called
нет причины для тревоги. And I was like, oh, this sounds very ominous. Нет причины для тревоги. What is this about? And he was like, actually, no, it's nothing to do with that. Like, oh, this is still very, very interesting. And I read the blurb at the back, and it talks about герои Зиника с решимостью преодолевают мировые границы, но не всегда справляются с абсурдом, которым переполнена позднесоветская жизнь и повседневность глобального мира. So I think that's another way of bridging that divide, and I would invite you to talk to us about this, and please tell us why it's called Нет причины для тревоги.
I'll tell you why in a second. I mean, it's just these blurbs, they're always deluding. On the other hand, my life is deluding. Anyway, it's just I didn't know written that much. I've been living for such a long time in a way. And I left the Soviet Union in 1975, so 50 years ago. So you can imagine, I mean, London wasn't like that, you know. It just, I could have numbered about probably 4 people with whom I could communicate in Russian in the whole London. And they all could be met in the corridors of the BBC Russian service. It was nothing, really, you wouldn't believe it, nothing. And anyway, and then there was a number of waves. I still met the people from the first wave. Then there was the second wave. First wave, as you know, is just white emigres, post-революционные. And then the second wave is the Second World War. Boris Miller, for example, who was selling books in Russian, he in a way was quite surprised by the third wave, because they spoke more or less kind of language they could understand. They couldn't understand White Russians, the previous one. But the us they could understand because we still spoke the same Soviet language. What was amazing is that he was born in Argentina and never been to Russia. And I discovered it quite late throughout our friendship. But anyway, there was a third wave, ours, then 1990s was a fourth wave, and then the fifth wave, which is after the event in 2022. Book by NLO, being published 2 weeks before the invasion. So nobody suspected that the title would sound so ironical. Нет причины для тревоги is actually a translation from the original English title of one of the short stories that included into this collection, which is No Cause for Alarm. I don't know, it is just one of the longest in this story, and it's a story about alarms, about shop alarms. Shop alarms, it's a surreal story about a character, a kind of outsider who decided to move from South London to North London, which was a drastic difference. It was, I started my living in Hampstead, and then my family joined me, and we had to move somewhere cheaper. So we found a place in Lewisham, near Blackheath, but still it was Lewisham, formally speaking. And we thought, well, it's much cheaper, and it's only 7 miles from West End. And we realized at that time that it's actually harder to get back to live in North London, especially in Hampstead, where I live now, than to emigrate from Moscow in 1975. So that's absurdity. It was part of the plot of this little short story, long short story. No Cause for Alarm. it's about this guy who moved to North London. He's a kind of anonymous, and he thought that his life would be much better in North London, but he was met by a kind of rather unpleasant crowd. He's an alien, and the trouble is that because of his nervosity and nervousness, he's acquired a terrible stomach problem. So his stomach is rumbling, and while it's rumbling at the street, the shop alarms start getting off. So, and everyone is looking what's the cause for these alarms, and nobody could guess that that's his terrible stomach. Well, you'll better buy this book and read the ending, but that was the reason why it was called «Нет причины для тревоги». I don't know what to say. What I wanted to say is just the stories here are about people who are, well, they sort of migrated or emigrated. All of them, all the stories mainly take place in outside Russia, and most of the characters connected with Russia, and they sort of brought their idiosyncratic habits and mannerisms and Russian привычки and tendencies and ideological prejudices, etc., that make their lives in the West, in Europe and in Britain specifically, rather bizarre and comic. I'm a comic writer. There is all comic stories, but some of them are tragically comic, and that's another first edition of my short stories, very old. It's a very rare book in a way, because then it's been republished by good, big publishing house in New York, New Directions, new issue, new collection in a way, and that's was published initially by a small publisher who was a kind of Tamizdat publisher in England. He spent a lot of time, Bеженцев, he spent a lot of time in Moscow and then moved to London and opened a little publishing house. And one of the books he published was mine, and then it was first published in English of Belevin. 2 books he produced, short stories. So it was quite a remarkable combination of an Englishman who's become Russified, come back, and has become a British publisher. And most of the stories that are here are now in Russian. But there is one long story called The Notification. It's quite bizarre again, surrealist story based on a tale of fairy tale by Wilhelm Hauff. Я уверен, что, может быть, большинство из вас не слышало об этой истории, but that was the fairy story, the beloved of mine in my childhood, called Карлик Нос. Nose the dwarf, sometimes it's translated into English this way. And the story is based on this kind of fabula about the plot of the story, or morals of the story. Anyway, it's about a new immigrant in Jerusalem from Russia who is actually stuck in time. He's thinking about Russia so intensely, about the Soviet friends and close ones, etc., and the wife is left behind, that he's not aware of the time passing in his life. And he's getting old, and he's turning into an ugly person. But he thinks that only a couple of years passed, in fact. all his life is already past, but he got stuck in the past. So don't get stuck in the past.
I need to read that.
Don't get stuck in the past. And my philosophy was always is just once you left, never go back. And the trouble is with the people who are getting stuck in the past and never become part of new life. And new life is not necessarily British life or American life, etc. You've got to create your own life in Britain, and you will be loved for this. You don't have to imitate, to walk around in tweeds and brogues to be like an Englishman, but you have to create your own fashion, but not to constantly be obsessed with the war even. You have to find a new language and new metaphors and new ideas how to treat this horrible disaster which has had happened for your generation that made you come here and listen to us, and probably buy our books. That's all.
Yeah.
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's very instructional. I definitely need to read the story about not getting stuck in the past. Make sure that your life hasn't passed. Yeah.
No, I had a very happy life.
No, I mean not you. But
Right
I
from
have
the
to.
beginning, yes.
I have to look.
All the way.
I'm very actually intrigued by, because you said all the Russians, all the people I could speak to in Russian were in the BBC, and this is called Русская служба. So I'm actually very intrigued because Русская служба сидит рядом с нами.
Can I just say it's a Русская служба in a sense, служба rendered.
Right.
Like service rendered.
Right.
Русская
Okay.
служба is very kind of, but it's very comic long story about poisoned umbrella.
Oh God. Let's not talk about Russian
It was
poison.
quoted by tragic ending of George Markov, whom we know with Masha. You haven't met her.
I came
You
later.
haven't met him.
Yeah.
No. We have. It's a Bulgarian, brilliant journalist and satirical writer who worked in the Bulgarian service. She was physically next door on the same corridor as the Russian service at that time. And we, of course, all those who, I was a freelancer, but I was frequently in the Russian service. And he was pricked with the poisoned umbrella
On the Waterloo Bridge.
under the Waterloo Bridge, yeah.
They are so artful and so artless in how they poison people. I don't know.
But it's a great invention, yes. The Russians helped the Bulgarian leadership with these umbrellas. But immediately it was so sensational that a Bulgarian wine in wine shops all over London had a boost in buying.
They
Got very
got
popular.
Bulgarian spies again, like on BBC. It was
Yeah.
Bulgarians who.
Oh yeah,
Yes.
Bulgarian.
Yeah,
was the
Bulgarian
viewers,
spies, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't think that
Yeah.
it's connected
History.
Who watched Grozny.
for a novelist
Yeah.
connection. Thank you. Sorry to interfere.
That's absolutely. I love conversation. My job is to not be here. Masha Karp, who spent many, many years actually working at the Russkaya Sluzhba, and I'm a complete, especially now since Robert is gone, I'm a complete imposter here. I'm not an emigre. Well, I am, but I've come from
From a
Germany, so
different country.
and nobody forced me to leave or anything. But I've also been here for a while. But I, for some reason, I also know lots of really good people from the Russkaya Sluzhba, BBC. So it seems to be a place where good people congregate
Absolutely.
of different generations.
Typists, they were great people.
Oh yes, and
Great ladies.
and I know somebody who was a fantastic editor, sound editor, so made me sound really, really clever, although I stumbled over my words and
talk nonsense. Anyway, but Masha today, I think, is not here primarily as a BBC journalist or ex-BBC journalist. Masha is here as a biographer of George Orwell. And can I touch your books? So she's written 2 biographies of George Orwell.
No.
And one.
No, there's just one.
Okay, oh, this is
the
all,
other
yeah.
book is not a biography.
It is a biography, sorry. This is.
You shouldn't have corrected.
Yes, I should have. That was very nice of you that you stopped me. Well, the thing is, I've read this one, which isn't a biography, so I know this. But this is a biography in Russian. The настоящий кирпич, so I'm very intrigued. Actually, Masha's going to talk to us about that. And yeah, why write 2 books? Why write them in 2 languages?
Right. These
And
are
totalitarianism and today, and double speak and lovers hate and 5-minute hate. This all seems very familiar.
Oh yes. Well, the books are very different. This book was published in 2017 in Petersburg, and it is a proper biography with lots of details, and it is addressed to the Russian readers who didn't know much about Orwell, because there was a period when everybody thought that he was an American writer, because he was so anti-Soviet that of course it's all the Americans who are so full of hatred for the Soviet Union. But he was very much a Brit with a touch of French blood. But what I was trying to show in this book was basically 2 things. How he managed to understand the Soviet Union so well. And the second thing, that very often, even today, people say, well, don't exaggerate. 19 Animal Farm may be, but 1984 is not actually about the Soviet Union. If you read Orwell's letters and Orwell's articles, you can see that he was obsessed with what was going on in the Soviet Union. Yes, obviously, you can transfer what he wrote to other situations. That's what great books really managed to do. But he was very, very scared of the future that might have these features of totalitarianism. And this book, so this one was published by Vita Nova, it is not in the auction, and Vita Nova, a Petersburg publisher, and this one was published by Bloomsbury. And when I was writing it, I was actually writing it for the Western audience, and although I don't really say it in that many words, but what I was trying to alert British readers to was that for many years, the book was published 23, so the war had started, and obviously all the other awful things had already happened before that. And my sort of secret intention was to show to the British readers that all these awful things that we see today, they have been coming gradually. The country was transforming under Putin very slowly, very gradually, but some awful things have been happening, and you in the West didn't notice them. You didn't want to notice them. You thought that, well, it's not like under Brezhnev. That's what people told me. And when I was saying that, look, you are recruiting for the Russian service people who used to work for the Soviet propaganda. Nobody even concealed that. But they said, Masha, it's a witch hunt. We live in a different era. It's a post-communist society. So all the 30 years, now it's 33, I think, years that I've been living in this country, I've been wondering how come that people here do not fully appreciate what's happening there, because I was still very interested in what was going on there. And so that is something that I think is important for this book. Now, talking about features of totalitarianism which really can be seen today, I would single out one that I think is the most important, and this is the system of organized lying. That was what Orwell thought the most important feature of totalitarianism. Now, we needn't think that he had always been so intelligent, that he understood things from the start. First of all, he supported Chamberlain rather than Churchill when Chamberlain brought peace from Munich. But also I find even endearing, but also heartrending, that when he was going to the Spanish Civil War to fight fascists, he actually said, look, there are more of us than there are of fascists. If each of us kills a fascist, we will win. And it wasn't a joke. At that point, even Orwell did not fully realize how easy it is to breed fascists, that they can be sort of created in any numbers in any given moment. And that is why this feature, let me quote, I always like this quote about the organized lying. The organized lying practiced by totalitarian states is not, as is sometimes claimed, a temporary expedient of the same nature as military deception. It is something integral to totalitarianism, something that would still continue even if concentration camps and secret police forces had ceased to be necessary. This is a very interesting ending of this quote, had ceased to be necessary. So he basically implies that the more intricate, the more powerful the system of manipulating people's minds is, the less you need concentration camps and prisons. Now, in a way, it is a consolation for our today's situation, because we know that the number of political prisoners is increasing incredibly, and there are already more political prisoners in today's Russia than there were in the end of the Soviet Union. Less than under Stalin, but still a lot. So the fact that the repressions are still necessary shows that probably some people are not yet fully hoodwinked. They are not yet fully, they're not fully, have fully become victims of the propaganda. And he thought of propaganda very, very seriously. And again, I'll read one more quote, because I think it was in his review of the book of the former Russian diplomat Nicolas de Bazely, whose book was called Russia under Soviet rule, and he this man de Bazely, he hoped that one day people would want to change things. They wouldn't want to live under this repression that was more and more increasing. But Orwell said, it was in 1938, or he published it January 1939. He argued with de Bazely. In the past, every tyranny was sooner or later overthrown, or at least resisted, because of human nature, which, as a matter of course, desired liberty. But we cannot be at all certain that human nature is constant. It may be just as possible to produce a breed of men who do not wish for liberty as to produce a breed of hornless cows. I'll read it again. I sort of didn't make the correct emphasis. It may be just as possible to produce a breed of men who do not wish for liberty as to produce a breed of hornless cows. The Inquisition failed, but then the Inquisition had not the resources of the modern state. The radio, press censorship, standardized education, and the secret police have altered everything. Mass suggestion is a science of the last 20 years, and we don't yet know how successful it will be. I think when he says mass suggestion, he actually means hypnosis, right? But it's not the hypnosis, it's not the technological, physiological tool that we see. We see that people are susceptible to propaganda because today the modern state has much more resources than even in his time. Then there was just radio, and today you have state-controlled television, internet, trouble factories, and whatnot. But the main thing in this propaganda, as I mentioned, was this system of organized lying. I quote in my book wonderful saying by Sergei Lavrov, we never attacked Ukraine. We just never attacked Ukraine. And I thought, well, that's a good example of this Orwellian propaganda. But today we have President Trump saying that Ukraine is itself to blame. That it was Ukraine who started the war. So this brings me back to what I said at the beginning. Yes, the book was about the Soviet Union. It applies to modern Russia, but you can see the same features elsewhere. You just lie, and people believe you. And this is, I think, the most tragic thing that has been happening. And I think that we who are here, we have to try and to clarify the situation for the people who are still in Russia, because I do not believe that all the Russian people are for the war, but I don't believe that all of them are against the war. It is much more complicated. It's a much more serious issue, and how we can try to help the people whose minds have been manipulated is also a very serious issue. And you know, we used to think that the Russian service of the BBC was broadcasting the truth, and today we have all these publishers, wonderful publishers abroad, from Freedom Letters to Vidim to Babel to all sorts of publishers who try to continue the Russian culture abroad. The same Tamizdat idea that started so long ago. How much it can work, we don't know. So I'll have to finish on this. I mean, I didn't want to be the last, and I didn't want to finish on this very grim note. But this, I think that this is something that tortures all of us. What's going to happen if people's minds are manipulated?
Thank you very much, Masha. Actually, I disagree. I think it's a very good thing to finish on. The danger of what happens when people's minds are manipulated, because it's so universally applicable now when we have reform in this country, we have the AfD in Germany, we have far-right parties on the rise everywhere. So I think it's a very good thing to actually remember. Anyway, so we have, thank you very much to my co-panelists, and we now have quite a bit of time for questions, and I'd like to invite questions from the audience in any language. Please ask any of us
Or all of us.
question, or all of us together.
Yeah, можно по-русски.
Можно по-русски, конечно. Можно по-русски.
Okay, can I start then?
Yes.
Look, in the current environment of information abundance, exaggerated by social media, inevitably the attention span has shortened. So nowadays the youngsters can run all the gadgets, they know how to connect, but they're educated by TikTok. Very short, very informative kind of messages rather than big things. Do you think as the writers and the poets you have to address that? Because reading long books nowadays is not an option. You can't get any youngster to sit and read. Maybe do you think you can change the way you deliver the message so that the truth is delivered instead of endless lies? And what do you think will happen in that field? It's a question to all of you.
Well, I personally do think that we are not doing enough. We often expect that someone else should do it. Journalists should do it, or influencers should do it. Like people whose job kind of it is. But the truth is, no. Like we all can contribute to that. I know I'm not doing enough for that. I tried doing the TikTok. Oh God, it's so tiring. It's actually a lot of work. That's the problem. That it, even like a short video with subtitle and stuff, it's a lot of work, and you need to be consistent. But I think even we can still write these long books, but we can help the audience on the online to find them by actually making sure those short videos or posts, concise and clear and inspiring, I guess. It is our job, I believe. Really, it's yeah. If we don't do it, no, it just won't happen.
It's a matter of, it's a disease of the century. I don't know, what can you, it's a state of consciousness. And it's disastrous indeed. Nobody knows what to do with this. What can novelists do? Novelists have personal problems. Sometimes these personal problems are reflected in the outside world. Then a person creates something, so-called novel, that it's automatically the reflection of the outside problems. But a novelist comes out and aims to resolve the outside problem. I've got a novel which actually was advertised for the auction, but I don't have a copy. It's called Orgon Box, and it's about organ manipulators. Was invented by Wilhelm Reich, tragic, absolutely mad figure. He was a Marxist Freudian, died in America in prison. But the idea is that consciousness is a kind of in a box, and you can train it and sexually even arouse it in a certain kind of environment. My novel deals with a person who constantly obsessed with his friends' consciousness and trying to destroy their lives. But is envious, nasty piece of work. And he's trying to destroy others' lives. But the more he destroys, the better lives of others become. And he's losing himself because he lives in a world, it's not entirely a realistic world that he lives in. It's a world of networking and media and social sites and etc., etc. So his consciousness is more or less what you describe. It's packed with these strange identities. It's written in a Russian English, Russian, Russified English and anglicized Russian. And what I wanted to, for example, illustrate my idea is that we live in the situation. I was writing it, I decided to write it in Russian because I constantly hear from my friends coming from Russia speaking a different language, absorbing English language, Russifying it. So I realized when I was writing it, it's again a kind of comic novel. I realized that I can invent words like кирзовое дерево. Кирзовое, like кирзовые сапоги. But I can say кирзовое дерево. And nobody could contradict me because those who read, they would think, well, probably there is such a thing. Because we live in the world of things that couldn't, a lot of things couldn't be proven. Because you're never sure, probably there is something that corresponds to this. Because we live in this world of websites. Half of them lying, simply. And that affects our consciousness, and the novel is about the effect all this life has on human beings. But how could you correct it? It's a matter of educationists and sociologists and government. I don't know.
I think it is what is very important is, of course, development in the young people of critical thinking. You know, I was once asked by a group of teenagers in Prague, it was, how do you, so I said, you know, you shouldn't really believe some of the sides of what they're saying. And they said, but how do you distinguish? And this is a very, very good and pertinent question. I think that one of the, I think sort of old novels, even like Orwell's, although it seems that everybody knows Orwell, yes and no. The absurdity, another feature of totalitarianism in Orwell's depiction is that it is absurd. And in Animal Farm, we have 3 hens during the scene of the execution, 3 hens who come out and say that they had Snowball coming to them in the dream and prompting them to poison the pond. Of course, they were immediately slaughtered. But just last year, I think it was, a man in Russia was fined for the equivalent of 400 pounds, I don't remember what it was in rubles, because he wrote in his Instagram that he saw a dream about Zelensky. And Zelensky, in his dream, ordered him to shoot all the Russian soldiers, but he said, you, this blogger, he said, I'll leave you alive. I'll allow you to live. You know, so if somebody has been trained by literature, by family, by culture, to recognize you know, the absurdity of it, because there are so many instances, you know, when there was another one connected to the war with Ukraine, which I can't help telling you, that there were 2 elderly people who painted their fence yellow and blue colors, because these were the 2 remaining paints in the shop, and they were at the discount. And completely innocently, they colored it yellow and blue. The authorities came, well, they were very elderly, and they were not imprisoned or detained or anything, but they were told to immediately repaint it. What's that? You know, so things like that, and I think a person with a normal sense of humor, with a normal attitude, critical attitude to what's going on, should be able to resist it. And this is probably something that children should be taught specifically. You know, I don't know of any other recipes.
And I think, I mean, that's really, I think I'd second you there. I had to teach a course on introduction to it was introduction to Russian literature because it was Russian students, but it was generally introduction to literature. And of course the brief was, tell people what literature is for. And I was just like, yeah, thanks. But actually, if the one thing, and you know, we all think about transferable skills, of course, reading literature is supposed to be enjoyment. And you can see a big movement now against smartphones in schools, and the kids are actually for it. That's really interesting. The kids are for it. The kids love it. Once you've got the whole class on board, or once you've got enough people, the kids love it. Of course, we need to communicate to people in a new way. I don't think one has to absolutely ape every fashion there is, and to kind of, people now only understand this, so we only can talk like that. What I said to people, to my students, we're talking about different narratives, different stories. People tell stories all the time. If you know who is telling the story and what's their agenda, you will become propaganda-proof. You will become much harder to manipulate. And the funny thing is, this was 2016, 2017. It wasn't even recent, but it was on my mind. You become, if you want an immediate practical application to literature, I'm really sorry that I've got to talk to you about practical application, but you will become one thing. You will be able to see who's talking, what's their agenda, who is talking. A story by Liskov, a story by Tolstoy. I think some of you were here already when I said, well, I have this problem with Tolstoy. I evidently didn't teach Anna Karenina very well. When successive female students came in and, I love Tolstoy, he really understands women. I was like, however, if you can actually see what he's doing, who is giving you these viewpoints, who is mastering, who's engineering it, you will be able to critically interrogate that. People love Anna Karenina. It's 700 pages long. Kids love Harry Potter. Students love The Master and Margarita. It's not true that people don't want to read. You have to make it palatable, you have to create the space, but I don't think there are so many people who write poetry, young people who write poetry. I don't think it's all just videos on TikTok. I really don't think it is. But of course, yes, you have to. They're not coming to us. We have to come to them. You're absolutely right.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Any more questions? Any more questions? Otherwise, I'll start asking you questions.
Well, can I ask you then one more question? If nobody wants to ask questions. Dreaded artificial intelligence.
Oh, that was my question.
Okay, you ask me. Then you go, Mila.
It's okay, carry on.
That's a different question.
Okay, I'll go from my perspective, and then Mila can ask. So, do you think with the right settings and feeding the right things, you can use it for translation of your own work? Because then you can be in charge, because artificial intelligence is not that bad. And then you've got an option of translating it to many languages and delivering the way you write, the feelings you express, because you trained the program to fit you, your mannerisms, your thinking, and then world is your oyster. Then you can be read by everybody in the world.
What do you mean read by everybody in the world?
In any language possible.
Yeah, but it's just to be read by everyone. You have to do something to be read
No,
by
of course.
everyone.
I mean, you can
Yeah, but you can be
deliver your
translated.
message to everyone, and then obviously whether you're
But
interested. in them.
why? Why do you want to send a message to everyone?
Well, that's a question to you.
No, but why? Why do that? I don't know. It's just people come. I remember 1970s when to publish one's own book, even in Tamizdat, so to speak, was a kind of an achievement. But nowadays we understand that you can print your own book whenever you like. It is not big money, it's a few £100. What are you going to do with the whole print? You'll get 1,000 copies. What are you going to do with this? Who is going to read it? Who is going to sell it? Who is going to exhibit it on the bookshop shelves? Who? I mean, it's a matter of readership rather than writer's business. Author's business is not publishing. So authors should stop publishing. I think that should be the rule. Authors should stop translating oneself. Stop
you deviated
sending
the
messages.
discussion.
I mean, how many
Discussion was
messages?
not about
How
this.
many literature in it?
I'll say something else.
Yeah.
As somebody who translates poetry, AI doesn't help at all with that.
Even with translating prose.
No,
it
and
doesn't help.
anything,
Yeah.
however, I have copiously used, and this is the very first time I've done it, copiously used it to translate my own conference papers when I had to give them in another language. And then all I have to do is edit. But they are not artistic expression, they are information, and I have a big body of information that I need to convey and very little time. And it actually now gets the right vocabulary, most of the time the right vocabulary, and then you just need to spend a day or so editing. I think for literature is quite AI proof as a translator. I really think it is. Anything that is slightly creative, artistic, forget it. It's like, can you summarize a poem? Yeah, I can summarize Shalamov's poem, but what's the point? And AI does exactly that. It summarizes the poem in some kind of prosy stuff.
I disagree.
Okay.
I disagree because there have been experiments where AI has been tasked with writing a poem in the style of two New Yorker authors.
Oh,
And
that's
I've read-
different.
And I've read the results and they were quite good.
That's different though.
So I think with time AI is becoming less and less sort of
Rigid.
less and less
Distinguishable
tool,
between
and it's getting harder to distinguish it
Yeah,
from
we're
an
going
actual
to
writer.
do it non-stop about AI. It will come back to Samizdat and Tamizdat subject,
Yeah.
which is the theme of our evening. I have a question. I mean, how a writer, author, is distinguished between, is there any difference where the person is located? And how is it reflected on the subject matter? I mean, do you feel as a literaturaret that authors differ depending on their location? If the person sits in Moscow, in Russia generally, or in Minsk, in Belarus, does it affect the subject? Because I know Moscow writers who write about foreign themes as if they're living in England, you know.
Does
So
it
there
sound true to life
No.
to you? Here is your answer. I actually think that, it very much depends on what the writer is doing, what they're writing about. Because, but even if it's sort of a completely lyrical outpouring, or if it is, on the contrary, something very science fictional, I think not exactly the location will betray you, because Gogol, after all, wrote in Rome, and we don't think of him as an Italian writer, and we don't see very much Rome reflected in Mörtwö, you see. So I think this is more complex. I think it is, I mean, the creative process is a very, very intricate thing. And that's why where exactly the author is sitting is probably not that important. But the language, you see, you are saying that we can teach, I'm sorry, Zinik, we can teach artificial intelligence to write like a poet, like a real poet. I don't think this is possible. Partially, or we can translate into a foreign language. Because in terms of translating, every language has its own system of imagery, its own system of affecting us, and it is very difficult for a tool that can be used for some very specific technical tasks to reach the creation of imagery, which basically what literature is about.
Can I just add on the topic of artificial intelligence? Yeah, I agree.
You tried.
Because that was the question, and I'm interested in that, and I have things to say. When you speak a minority language and when you write in minority language, right? You don't have. There are a lot of translators and people, English-speaking people who speak Russian. It's still widely learned. People are still lots of English-speaking people are interested in Russian literature. They can translate, but it's not like that with the Belarusian language. And then with a lot of other languages who have even fewer speakers, you know, and less access to the international to the global scene than that. And yes, for us, nobody really knows about Belarusian literature. And there are very few native English speakers who know Belarusian language. In the UK, I think there are two. Jim Dingley and Arnold Macmillan.
Yes.
That's it. I do translate my own poetry and my own prose because nobody's gonna do that.
Yeah.
I can wait for 50 or 70 years and it's never gonna happen. And I try to translate my colleagues from Belarus because nobody's gonna do that. And I do think that even artificial intelligence, everybody's using Google Translate. Come on.
No, I use Google
Most
Translate.
And we can debate which one is better. I prefer Google Translate, right? And then ChatGPT. I don't say that. Yes, it is partially unethical to use, but you can use it for help. Say, I sometimes do that. I translate the thing, and then I feed it into ChatGPT and say, can you check it for grammatical mistakes? You know, can you check it and say, does it make sense? Does this sentence in English make sense? And I think it is helpful because then it's also by training it, I'm training myself. Because then I said, no, this is not correct. This is correct. I'm like, okay, now I know how it's correct as well because I'm not a native speaker. But it's just so complex and it's amazing. I translate my own non-fiction now. I have an English friend, writer and translator, who's helping, but he's not a Belarusian or Russian native speaker. So he's helping me, but also, you know, I really find other tools useful. And for the Belarusian language and other minority kind of spoken language, it can be crucial.
It is a tool. It is fun.
It
I
is
mean,
a tool.
I'm not
It's
anti-AI.
how
I'm not
how
at
we
all
use it.
anti-AI.
Yeah. I don't say that it's gonna replace poets and writers. No, it can. I don't think it will ever be able to translate literature perfectly, but we definitely benefit from it.
У меня есть вопрос про писателя 70-х. Вы, может быть, его знаете, Александр Шаров. И его книгу, которую он написал в 1984 году, но которая была издана только 30 лет позже, спустя смерть и воскрешение Бутова, приключения на новом кладбище. Как вам кажется, то, что книга пролежала 30 лет, это уже был 1984 год, почему она не была напечатана, знали ли вы его, и знали вы авторов,
которые в 70-е или послевоенное время не печатались, которые мы еще откроем.
Вы знаете, это довольно абсурдный в каком-то смысле и трагический момент. Потому что, if you remember, I don't know, should I speak English or Russian?
Both, it doesn't matter.
Например, мало кто отдает себе отчет, что Москва петушки, на самом деле, Вениамина Ерофеева, она была напечатана по-английски только 20 лет спустя ее появления в самиздате по-русски. По разным причинам, потому что люди реагируют на литературу по-разному. Например, белая эмиграция, которая находилась в 70-е годы, была ключевой в издательстве книг. Самые крупные издательства руководились людьми православной, очень четкой, церковно-православной ориентации. В каком-то смысле они не были, я не скажу, что они были по-российски не националистами, но патриотами до такой степени, что они подозрительно относились к высказываниям. Когда они слышали предложение, где есть слова «русский народ», а дальше что-то такое несусветное, они к этому автору относились весьма осторожно. С одной стороны. С другой стороны, английские переводчики концентрировались только на, в каком-то смысле, официальной литературе. Потому что вы забываете, что 70-е годы – это годы холодной войны, когда вся литература вообще про Советский Союз в каком-то смысле была частью всей системы, включая разведку. Поэтому субсидировались или поощрялись, и вообще в каком-то смысле славянские отделения занимались изучением феномена Советского Союза. Если у тебя задача изучать феномен Советского Союза, то ты занимаешься официальной литературой Советского Союза. Ты не интересуешься какими-то людьми, которые сидят в каких-то забегаловках и обмениваются рукописями, переводами своими Вильяма Берроуза по-русски. Или сидят на квартирах, пьют водку и читают стихи, я не знаю.
Виктора Кривулина.
Да, не знаю, у меня другая школа, но во всяком случае не советских, не. Короче говоря, это очень сложный процесс. Люди очень сильно реагируют на... Это загадка, на самом деле, кто становится популярным. Ну, я не могу ответить на этот вопрос. Я могу ответить, каждый может ответить, почему какие-то авторы не проходили. I'm myself a victim of it. I remember when you couldn't publish a book in Russian. My first, the novella, by the way, that I mentioned, the notification. There is a sex scene there. There is oral sex there, which was unheard of in Russian literature. And it was 1976, I think. So I don't know, I was accused, and because it was set in Jerusalem, I was accused of being anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic pornographer. Which was very nice, because...
What's the name of the book? Is it an auction? Okay, thank you. Can you sign it, please?
Which was very nice, because I was immediately... I was immediately bought by a very big French publisher called Albin Michel, very reputable. And then they published my next 3 novels in translation. That actually taken another about 10 years to publish a novel which was first appeared in French, called Перемещенное лицо, en personne déplacée, or a displaced person. It still hasn't been published in English, actually, because nobody wants to do that. because I don't know, your time is passing. You know, I was very famous author in London in 1990s because one of my books was turned into a film, BBC film, 3 hours, The Mushroom Picker. It is now going to be reissued in Russian by NLO again. Русофобка и франкофил. Русофобка с 2 S, because it's from Jean-Jacques Rousseau. No. And I was very famous author, but certain books, I never made it, you know, it's never been published in English. Because my time has passed in a way. I'm writing about peculiar things, about certain themes that are not yet on the minds of people who, like you left Russia at the peak of the conflict, and the people are obsessed with different subject matter, you know. So it happens. Trouble. It's a troublesome profession to be a writer. And I don't think that GPT would help.
You migrated in 70s. В 70-е годы вы приехали.
Я приехал в 75-м, да.
А как вы приехали тогда?
А потому что тогда была холодная война, и поэтому, если это было, как известно, давление американское, Соединенных Штатов и Европы на Советский Союз, экономическое давление, и советские власти при Брежневе решили взамен на экономические привилегии торговли с Соединенными Штатами и Европой, они ослабили контроль по отъезду за границу. И они придумали следующую вещь, что ты можешь выехать за границу на поселение, за границу, выехать, уехать, эмигрировать, если ты можешь доказать, что у тебя там есть родственники. Потому что это подходило под соглашение after the war agreement about reunification of families separated by the Second World War conflict. Так что если ты мог найти родственника, тебя отпускали. Некоторых держали, некоторых были проблемы. Если ты еврей, если еврейского происхождения, я заведомо был таким. Я об этом плохо знал и мало понимал, но я тут же обнаружил какую-то прапратетушку в Америке. Причем не надо было ничего доказывать. Нужно было составить то, что называется легенду.
Да, я знал еврейскую иммиграцию, я думал, в Израиле.
Это была не еврейская иммиграция, это создали журналисты, потому что из-за того, что евреям очень часто отказывали, они придумали замечательную кампанию по скандальным, так сказать, моментам всего этого, в том, что власти запрещают выезд там, и так далее. Власти запрещали выезд всем. Но слышали только про евреев, поэтому это стало известно как еврейский.
Как вы выбрали? Уже тогда в молодости хотели в Лондон?
Нет, я ничего не хотел, я приехал в Иерусалим, потому что меня туда пригласили, и меня пригласили. Все было удивительно легко.
До того, как вы мне написали вот это.
Да, до того, да. Ну, не совсем. Там был веселый очень... Нет, там, я не знаю, наоборот. Нет, я там делал театр, там меня пригласили в театр. Там был студенческий театр при университете, и они хотели что-то такое по-русски и одновременно на иврите. Я очень быстро выучил иврит, я просто гениально выучил иврит. И в отличие от некоторых сионистов, я до сих пор спокойно говорю на иврите. И я с удовольствием, мне очень понравилась страна, я тогда ничего не понимал в арабском конфликте. Я пытался выучить даже арабский в конце своего пребывания. И я после этого очень много ездил, уже даже из Англии. И вот меня, значит, французы взяли меня под свое крыло, и я приехал во Францию, и я провел там приблизительно месяца 3, а потом Her Majesty, the Queen, decided that the BBC should need a Russian service, they need a new blood. So Her Majesty the Queen has invited me to come to Britain and to live here. And I kindly agreed.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Maybe this is actually a very good moment to finish. We are at 8 o'clock.
The Queen, yeah, the King.
Thank you so much for coming. As I said, the auction is ongoing until 2 a.m. I actually shall take a second look. Last year I bid for quite a few books, and lo and behold, I won a few of them, so I spent much more money than I wanted. Warning, that can happen.
But that's why all the students came.
That's
to
why these students. No, I'm not that rich. Yes. So thank you very much, and yes, over to you.
Thank you very much for honoring.
Thank you all, and thank you for coming. Yes.
And what a beautiful space! I had no idea.
Yeah,